This tutorial video will cover a typical workflow of how to render an architectural interior shot with the Maxwell Suite. For this interior rendering, we will use Autodesk Revit, Autodesk 3ds Max, Maxwell 3ds Max plugin, Maxwell Studio, and Maxwell Render. We will cover a step-by-step process from importing a model from your host software to saving your final rendered image. The Maxwell Suite is a powerful engine used by designers to produce a wide range of images, from architectural representation to film and TV production. For this tutorial, we will use Maxwell 3ds Max plugin, Maxwell Studio, and Maxwell Render. As a reminder, please make sure your entire suite is the same updated version, including all of your plugins. For this tutorial, we will use 3ds Max 2012 and so Revit. Let's start by opening our digital model. This model right here was created by Autodesk Revit as a sample project. I will now choose the view that I would like to render. In this case, my living room interior view. With this shot, the camera position is really fundamental, and that is an important part of what we want to bring into the Maxwell Suite. By saving it as a .dxf and bringing that file into Maxwell, our already set camera will be lost and the model comes in as an exterior perspective only. Since we want our workflow to be practical, it is much more advantageous to save our Revit file in a way that includes our camera angle, specifically for our interior shots. So I will now export this model as a .fbx file so that I can import it into software that will read our camera angle, which is 3ds Max. We will now open 3ds Max. In 3ds, we will import our model into the scene. Once the model has loaded, click Alt plus your wheel to pan to the north side of the model. You will notice the camera positioned exactly as we had it set in Revit at first. Let's right-click on the camera and click Set View to Selected Camera. Click on the screen for an update. This is the camera view we had set up at first in Revit. Let's now use the Maxwell plugin for 3ds Max, which is right here. Click on the first button to the left. Export a reference MXS file. When the window opens, select Entire Scene, Current Frame, and an export file name. Once that is done, we can open our Maxwell Studio. In Maxwell Studio, click File, Import. Instead of the perspective, set your viewport to the camera 3D view living room. Here we have the exact same scene we had first set up in Revit. We are now ready to apply materials to all objects in our scene. You might notice this model was brought into Maxwell Studio with a lot of default materials. It is your choice to either use the default conditions or create your new materials straight in Maxwell Studio. If you do use the default, select all of the materials and right-click on the selection. Click Reload Preview. Then you will be able to see how the defaults look like and fully load their preview onto Maxwell Studio. I have chosen to remove all default materials and start from scratch with this particular scene. As you can see, my materials list is basically blank. In my objects list, I have grouped objects so that it is easier for me to locate them. We can do so by selecting the objects we want to group. In this case, let's select all of the chairs from the living room seating, right-click, and select Group. We can now name our group, and it will appear at the bottom of the objects list. We can collapse it and expand it. Let's now start applying materials. Here is the same scene, but with most materials applied to it. Let's trade our view from shaded to texture so we can kind of see how it's gonna look. I will now show you the different ways we can create and apply materials in Maxwell. First, we will look for a material in the Material Browsers panel in the local library. On the Materials database, we will find a letter surface. Click and drag to the materials list to embed it in your scene. By selecting all objects in the seating group on the objects list, drag the letter material onto your objects. You will notice in the viewport that now the chairs no longer have a default texture to them. Let's now create a material using Maxwell's Material Wizard. We will apply it to the teapot resting in the coffee table. First, we will create a new material by right-clicking on the materials list and selecting New Material. With this new material, we can use Material Editor panel to rename it. I will rename it Teapot. We can select from a variety of presets that help us create the perfect material for our objects. We can select the metal, its roughness, and its color. Let's update the preview. Maxwell gives us a way to begin creating a material. After adjusting the material in your Material Editor panel, apply it to the selected object, in this case, the teapot. Now, I will talk about how to apply more than one material to the same object. This is the exact same thing I had already done with this fireplace right here. Within an object, Maxwell can select triangle areas, and with that, we are able to apply to each triangle group a material. We will for this use the coffee table. In our camera view, let's select the coffee table, and right-clicking, say Isolate Selection. So that we don't mess up with our camera angle, we will edit the coffee table in the perspective viewport. We can right-click and say Center Selection. Change your cursor to the Triangle Selection tool, located on the top ribbon. Looking at our Object Parameters panel. We can see that the coffee table has 3 triangle groups. And if you look at the viewport, as I select them, they become highlighted. All we need to do now, since the triangle groups have already been selected, is apply materials to each triangle group. We can click and drag materials from the materials list. Right-click to de-isolate the selection and go back to 3D view. Here we have back again our camera. All we have left to apply now are emitter materials to our lights. We can do it by creating a new emitter in the materials list and applying to our objects. So by right-clicking in the materials list, we can select New Emitter. And here we'll have the same process, essentially, as for any other material. Let's name this one Sconce Light 1. I'd like to select the preview for an emitter for 2 meters. Here's my light group. For this model, I have 4 smaller sconce lights and then 2 pendant lights. For my Sconce Light 1 material, I can use a preset of a compact fluorescent lamp that is cold. I can also change the color of that lamp. And I can change its power. With my emitter created, I will click and drag and apply it to my first sconce light. I could apply the same emitter to every single light of mine, But so that I can control each one of them independently later, I will clone each emitter by right-clicking and saying Clone Material. I will name the emitter number 2, and I will do that 2 times more. With 4 sconce light emitters, I can now apply them to the rest of my sconce lights. For my pendant lights, I will do the same type of thing. I will right-click and say New Emitter. I will select a preset for a tubular fluorescent lamp that is mid-range. And I will name it Pendant Light 1. I will clone the material. And apply each one of them to one of my lamps. With emitters applied, now our model should be ready to start rendering. Let us select our render options and our environment. Let's enable multi-light for intensity separate. Multi-light allows us to control every single light in the scene, our ISO, shutter speeds, the sun, and the physical sky, all in Maxwell Render, and adjusting simultaneously as the render is calculated. Starting the render process. You might notice multi-light is a very interesting tool. Here we have access to adjusting every single emitter and luminous quality of our scene. If you look at my preview, you might see that I'm adjusting right now my ISO, right now my shutter speed, my sun, and my physical sky. As you may see, my render has been adjusted automatically. Let's now look at the preview for our lamps. I will now turn sconce light number 1 on. You can see on my preview how much it's glowing and how I can turn it extremely off. Multi-light allows us to do all of this automatically as the render goes. I will leave all of them on so you can see how it differs. Pendant lights are now being turned on. As you may see in the preview, it refreshes it automatically. And while the render is still on 1%, we can immediately see the update. This tutorial video covered the typical workflow of how to render an architectural interior shot with the Maxwell Suite. We went through a step-by-step process using Autodesk Revit, 3ds Max, Maxwell 3ds plugin, Studio, and Maxwell Render. tutorial number 4 will now cover material creation in Maxwell Studio.